Welcome back to the channel, and thank you for being here. Today, I'm sharing a deeply personal story, one that changed the way I see family, trust, and loyalty. This isn't easy to talk about, but it's important to tell it exactly as it happened. Please stay with me until the end.
The first thing my brother did when he saw me standing near the glass wall of the restaurant was smirk. Not the casual, polite kind, the kind that lifts only one corner of his mouth, slow and deliberate, like he was savoring something bitter that finally tasted sweet. I should have left the second I noticed him. The place was too expensive for coincidences anyway. Dim amber lights, linen-draped tables, polished silverware catching reflections from crystal chandeliers. The kind of downtown steakhouse where men in tailored suits shook hands over $800 bottles of wine and whispered about acquisitions like they were trading baseball cards. I was there because my client insisted on celebrating in person, and because, stupidly, I hadn't checked who else might be there. I was halfway through responding to a text from my assistant, "Parking downstairs, sorry, late," when I heard my name. Soft at first, then louder. "Lena?" I froze. That voice had lived in my bones for 32 years. I turned. Ethan stood beside a tall man in a navy suit that probably cost more than my first apartment. My brother's hair was slicked back perfectly, his cufflinks catching the light when he lifted his hand in that exaggerated, friendly wave he reserved for people he thought he'd already beaten. "Wow," he said, stepping closer. "Didn't expect to see you here." I smiled. Automatically. Reflex. Years of conditioning. "Hi, Ethan." His eyes flicked over me, fast and sharp. My black blazer, simple heels, leather tote, searching for cracks, for proof I didn't belong. Behind him, the older man studied me with quiet curiosity. Silver hair at the temples, calm eyes, posture relaxed but alert. The kind of man who didn't need to announce power because rooms rearranged themselves around him anyway. Ethan turned to him. "Oh, this is my sister," he said, thumb jerking toward me like I was an afterthought. Then he chuckled. "Our family's failure." The word hit like a glass dropped on marble. Failure. He said it lightly, amused, as if it were an old inside joke everyone should appreciate. I felt heat crawl up my neck. The man's brows twitched, barely. Ethan kept going. "She used to be brilliant, you know. Top of her class. Everyone thought she was going to run the world." He shrugged. "Dropped out of med school, floated around. Last I heard she was freelancing? Something like that." He looked at me, grin widening. "You still doing that consulting thing?" I tasted blood where I bit my tongue. I could have corrected him. I could have said I didn't drop out, I transferred. Or I didn't float, I rebuilt. Or I run my own firm with 12 employees and 3 seven-figure contracts this year. Instead, I said something like that, because some part of me, the part that still remembered Thanksgiving dinners and shared bedrooms, and the way Mom used to say, "be the bigger person," didn't want to make a scene. Ethan turned back to his companion. "This is Richard Hale," he said, "CEO of Hale Industrial Systems." My stomach tightened. Hale Industrial. Even if you weren't in my line of work, you knew the name. Infrastructure, energy grids, defense contracts, billion-dollar quarterly reports. I extended my hand. "Nice to meet you." Richard shook it slowly. His grip was firm, measured. "Likewise." His eyes didn't leave my face when he said it. Ethan glanced between us, then laughed. "So yeah, Lena here always hated corporate life, said it was soulless. Guess you were right, huh?" Before I could answer, a server appeared with menus. Richard nodded politely, but his attention stayed fixed on me. "You're dining alone?" he asked. "No," I said, "waiting for someone." Ethan's lips curved. "Client?" "Yes." That word seemed to amuse him even more. "Well," he said, clapping his hands once, "we're about to sit down. Richard here was just telling me about their new expansion project, biggest thing they've done yet." I nodded. "That sounds significant." Richard tilted his head. "It is." There was something in his voice, not boastful, testing. Ethan didn't notice. He leaned closer to me, lowering his voice in a way that made sure Richard could still hear me. You should really consider getting back into something stable. I could talk to HR for you. Entry level maybe. Admin side." I stared at him. "Thanks," I said quietly. He smiled, satisfied. Then he gestured toward the dining room. "Anyway, nice seeing you, sis. Don't be a stranger." He started to turn away. Richard didn't move. "Ethan?" My brother paused. "Yes?" Richard's voice dropped soft, smooth, almost gentle. "You said your sister was a consultant?" Ethan blinked. Yeah, something like that." "What kind?" I felt my pulse in my ears. Before I could speak, Ethan waved a hand. "Strategy stuff, I think. Small businesses, non-profits, maybe?" Richard looked back at me. "And is that accurate?" Every muscle in my body tightened. "Yes," I said. Ethan shot me a look like, "Don't embarrass yourself." Richard studied me for another second, then nodded once. "I see." There was a pause. The air thickened. Ethan shifted his weight. "Well, we should—" Richard interrupted him. "Which firm?" My brother hesitated. "Firm?" "Her firm," Richard said calmly. My brother frowned. "You have a firm now?" I kept my voice steady. "Yes." "What's it called?" I hesitated for half a beat. "Northbridge Solutions." The name hung between us. Richard's expression changed. Not dramatically, not visibly, just sharpened, like a lens snapping into focus. Ethan didn't notice. "Cute name," he said. Richard didn't smile. "How long have you been running it?" 6 years. Silence. Richard exhaled slowly through his nose. "Interesting." Ethan laughed. "Look, Richard, she's good. I'm not saying she's not smart. She just took the scenic route, you know?" Richard finally turned to him. "And you?" Ethan straightened. "I'm Senior Operations Manager at Grayline Holdings." "Yes," Richard said. "You mentioned." His eyes flicked back to me. "And what's Northbridge's current focus?" I could feel the servers hovering nearby, pretending not to listen. The hum of the dining room blurred into background static. "Corporate restructuring," I said. "Risk mitigation. M&A integration." Richard's mouth twitched. "Busy space." "Very." Another pause. Ethan cleared his throat. "So—" Richard raised his hand. "Forgive me, Ethan," he said, still polite, "but your sister's name feels familiar." My heart skipped. Ethan frowned harder. "Really?" Richard nodded slowly. "I believe I reviewed a Northbridge report last quarter." I felt my fingers curl around my tote handle. Ethan blinked. "For what?" Richard looked at him. "Our Westport acquisition." The color drained from my brother's face so fast it was almost frightening. "That," Ethan stammered, "that was confidential." "Yes," Richard said, "it was." He turned to me. "You were lead author, weren't you?" Every instinct screamed at me to deflect, to downplay, to disappear. Instead, I lifted my chin. "Yes." Richard smiled. Not wide, not friendly, respectful. It was impressive. Ethan stared at me. "You worked on that?" "Yes. That deal was $8 billion. I'm aware." His jaw tightened. Richard added casually, "We followed her recommendation to replace the entire regional leadership team." Ethan swallowed. "That was controversial." Richard nodded. "And correct." I felt something shift in my chest, a slow, dangerous warmth. Ethan tried to laugh, but it came out thin. "Well, guess I underestimated you." Richard didn't take his eyes off him. "Sounds like you did." The table behind us went quiet. Ethan glanced around, suddenly aware of how many ears were pointed in our direction. "Anyway," he said, forcing brightness, "we're supposed to get seated." "Yes," Richard said. Then he looked at me again. "Who were you waiting for, Lena?" "My client." "And?" "They're late." Richard checked his watch. "Usually punctual?" "Yes." "Good." Ethan frowned. "Why?" Richard didn't answer him. He studied me for a moment longer, then nodded towards the hostess stand. "I'll join you." I blinked. "You don't have to." "I'd like to." Ethan's mouth opened. "Richard, our table." Richard cut him off gently. "It can wait." The hostess appeared, eyes darting between us. "Sir?" "Table for 3, Richard said. Ethan looked at me like I'd just kicked the legs out of under him. I followed Richard toward the waiting area, heart hammering. This was spiraling. Fast. My phone vibrated in my hand. A text from my assistant. "Client just arrived. He says to meet you upstairs in the private dining room." I swallowed. Richard glanced down. "Everything okay?" "Yes." I hesitated. "They're upstairs." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Private dining?" "Yes." Ethan scoffed. "Must be some client." I didn't respond. Richard studied me, then smiled faintly. "Lead the way." The elevator ride was torture. Ethan stood stiffly on my right, arms crossed. Richard relaxed on my left, hands folded, watching the floor numbers climb. My phone buzzed again. Also, he brought guests, board level. Great. The doors opened. The hallway upstairs was quieter, thicker carpet, frosted glass doors labeled with names. I stopped at the end. "Here." Ethan glanced at the plaque. "Hawthorne Room."
The room felt smaller with the door closed. Not physically. There was still a 20-foot table, a wall of windows overlooking the river, a chandelier made of twisted glass, but emotionally, like the oxygen had thinned, like something heavy had settled into every corner. Ethan was still standing near the doorway. He hadn't taken another step. His eyes flicked from me to Richard to the man gripping my shoulder, my client, like his brain was buffering, trying to load a reality that didn't match the one he'd been living in for years. My client, Mark, didn't notice the shock yet. He was riding the energy of a room full of executives who'd just finished dessert and were buzzing on expensive wine and bigger numbers. Come in," he said, steering me gently toward the table. "We were just talking about the next phase. You remember everyone, right?" I nodded, even though my pulse was pounding so hard I could feel it behind my eyes. Richard followed a step behind us. Ethan didn't. Mark glanced over his shoulder. "Your friends joining?" I hesitated. "This is my brother," I said. Mark blinked once, then smiled politely. "Ah!" Richard stopped beside him. "And I'm Richard Hale." Mark's eyebrows shot up. "The Richard Hale?" Richard extended a hand. Mark shook it, laughing. "Well, I'll be damned. Small world." Ethan finally moved. Slowly, like he was afraid the carpet might give way under his feet. Mark gestured to the seats. "Sit, please. We were just reviewing Lena's proposal." Ethan stiffened. "My sister proposed something?" "Yes," Mark said easily. "Saved us north of 400 million so far." I felt every head in the room swivel toward me. Ethan swallowed. Richard took the chair to my left without asking. Ethan slid into the one across from me, hands gripping the armrests like they were the only thing keeping him upright. Mark tapped the tablet in front of him, and the screen on the wall shifted. Flowcharts, cost curves, a bold title. Northbridge Solutions Phase 2 Integration Strategy. Ethan's face drained even more. Mark leaned against the table. "We brought Lena in when our internal team couldn't figure out why 3 of our divisions were bleeding cash after the Westport acquisition. She found it in 2 weeks. Richard nodded. "Vendor overlap. Redundant logistics," Mark added. "Labor misalignment. Regional politics we were too close to see." Ethan stared at the screen. Richard looked at me. "You also flagged the pension exposure." "Yes. That saved us another 80. Mark chuckled. "And prevented a class action nightmare." My brother's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. $80 million? I kept my gaze on the table. "Yes." The silence stretched. Mark finally noticed Ethan properly. "And you are?" Ethan straightened reflexively. "Ethan Cole, Senior Operations Manager at Greyline." Mark nodded. "Good for you." Then his attention drifted right back to me. "We were debating whether to greenlight your Chicago pilot." I blinked. "Tonight?" He smiled. "If you're comfortable." Richard raised an eyebrow. "You didn't tell me that part." Mark shrugged. "She likes to keep things lean." Ethan looked between them. "Chicago pilot?" I took a breath. "It's a restructuring model.
New supply chain architecture, AI-assisted forecasting. Richard's lips curved. Ambitious. Necessary. Mark tapped the table. The board split. Richard leaned back. I'm not. Everyone looked at him. I want to hear it directly from her. My throat tightened. Now. In front of my brother. Mark gestured. Floor's yours. I stood. The room shifted. Eyes sharpened. Pens paused. Ethan's gaze was glued to me. I walked to the screen, feeling the weight of every step, the years of family dinners where I'd been the quiet one, the one who'd left the real profession, the one who wasn't sure yet. I picked up the remote. This is Chicago. The slide changed. Maps, warehouse locations, rail hubs. 3 distribution centers doing the work of 5. 2 of them in flood risk zones. Vendor contracts written for 2011 volumes. Richard's head tilted. You'd consolidate north. Yes. Close one facility, lease instead of own, shift last mile to hybrid fleets. Mark nodded. CapEx? High in year 1, recouped by Q3 year 2. And label-offs? Someone asked. Minimal. Reassignments. Automation absorbs attrition. Richard folded his hands. And unions? I met their eyes. I already spoke to their reps. His brow lifted. You did? Yes, quietly. A murmur rippled around the table. Ethan looked like he'd been punched. Mark smiled wider. She always does. I clicked again. Risk matrices, timelines, contingency ladders. Richard watched without interrupting. When I finished, the room was quiet. Too quiet. Then Richard spoke. When can you start? I blinked. Tomorrow. He smiled. Good. Ethan's chair creaked as he shifted. But, Richard added, eyes still on me, I have one concern. My stomach tightened. Yes? He turned, slowly, to my brother. Your brother works in operations at Greyline. Yes. Greyline bid for a subcontract for Chicago. I froze. Ethan's head snapped up. They did? Richard nodded. They lost. Ethan frowned. To who? Richard looked back at me. To Northbridge's recommendation. The room exhaled. Ethan stared at me like he was seeing a stranger wearing my face. You blocked us? I evaluated you, I said quietly. And? You ranked 4th. Mark winced softly. Richard didn't. He smiled. And accurately, it seems. Ethan's jaw clenched. The room started buzzing again. Side conversations, murmurs, phones lighting up. Mark clapped once. All right, let's get back to business. He turned to me. Stay after, we'll finalize. I nodded. Ethan didn't move. Richard stood. Excuse me. He circled the table toward my brother. Everyone pretended not to watch. I did anyway. Richard stopped behind Ethan's chair, placed one hand on the backrest, leaned down just enough that only they two could hear. But I was close enough. I don't recommend humiliating people in public, he said softly. Ethan stiffened. Especially when you don't know who signs the checks. Ethan swallowed. Richard straightened. Then he looked at me. I'll see you shortly, Lena. And left the room. The door shut. My phone buzzed again. A new message from my assistant. Emergency. Call me when you can. It's about the Greyline leak. My stomach dropped. Because I knew exactly who that might involve, and Ethan was still sitting across from me staring holes through the table.